Wanna hear my new song? Oh, sure, I love music. That was one note. And wasn't it beautiful? I'm not sure you know what music is. Ladies, gentlemen, and tarnished of all ages, one of the best parts of Elden Ring is that there are over 300 weapons that the player can use within this game. This creates an absolutely insane amount of playstyles, and that is before even counting in the sorceries and incantations that make up even more countless possibilities of ways to play the game. But let's be honest, swinging a big hunk of metal or wood or flesh on a stick is just a really fun way to play through the game, so today I'm going to go over my personal top 10 weapons in Elden Ring. These are the ones that I enjoy the most myself, and while for the most part this is because I love them conceptually, not a list of the most powerful weapons in the game by any means, the vast majority of these are extremely strong to use as well, which of course makes them even better. After all, there's nothing more satisfying to me than killing one of the hardest bosses in the game just by flicking them in the face with a finger on a stick. Without further ado then, let's begin with number 10.
Spin, 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 and away I go!
Ordovis's Greatsword. This weapon is just a lot of fun to use. The base moveset is just a normal Greatsword shenanigans, but the weapon skill on it is great. You spin the blade above your head and then slam it into the ground for a massive pop of damage and a ton of poise damage too. After the changes, this thing is seen in multiple patches, most notably in patch 1.07, which increased the attack power, motion speed, poise damage, and the poise of the user while casting it and made it faster to use after doing other actions. It just became genuinely very strong too. The poise that it has specifically means that you're able to use it against the vast majority of enemies in the game even while they're attacking you and just tank through whatever they throw at you with minimal, if any, issues. And I just really enjoy the animation it has when you use it. It is quite buffable, being a weapon skill that is charged and deals multiple types of damage, and I just find it fun to use. It isn't at the top of the list, obviously, but I did feel it deserved a slot nonetheless. Number 9, Frozen Needle. I both absolutely adore this weapon and am disappointed by it simultaneously. It is in the unfortunate position of being a super cool concept with extremely limited strength, so it is hard to make any sort of viable build around it. What makes this weapon particularly unique is that the heavy attack fires out the ice blade of the weapon as a projectile in front of you. It's really cool, and I fell in love with it the second that I found this weapon for the first time quite early in the game. I wanted to make myself build around it and make it as strong as it could get, but I found out quite quickly that it just doesn't get all that strong. The weapon skill itself is locked to Impaling Thrust, which is just sort of okay. The scaling of the weapon at max level is only B in Dex, with not a particularly high AR to go along with it, and uniquely and very annoyingly, the heavy attack of this weapon is not buffed by the Axe Talisman, even though the sole purpose of the Axe Talisman is to buff heavy charged attacks. As a result, while this weapon is extremely cool, and that's why it has the spot that it has on the list, it still holds a place in my heart, but I couldn't in good conscience put it any higher up, knowing that it just has such problematic limits to its power. Number 8, Dragon King's Cragblade, and this is one that I'm quite a fan of as well. A giant heavy thrusting sword with an absolutely gnarly look to it. It looks ancient, it looks powerful just by its mere appearance. The moveset itself is fun, it has a semi-unique heavy attack shared with Bloody Hellas, and the fact that it deals bonus damage to dragon enemies is a cool little lore tidbit shoved into the mechanics of the weapon itself. But of course the main thing that makes this weapon fun is the unique skill that it has, Thundercloud form. This turns you into a cloud for as long as you hold it down, pursuing your enemy in a strange form until you land with a giant splash of ancient dragon lightning. It does loads of damage, it's really visually cool, it is conceptually badass, and it just feels really good to use. Not to mention that this thing has gotten various buffs over time to make it even stronger and even more worth using aside from the cool factor itself. I have always been a fan of this weapon, and it definitely deserves a spot here. Number 7. Eleonora's Pole Blade. I feel like this one doesn't even need an explanation, honestly. It's just a double-bladed lightsaber in sword form. It leaves a glowing red trail behind it as you swing. It is in the twin blade class of weapon, which is not only new in Elden Ring, but really fun to use in my opinion, and different from just about every other kind of weapon in the game. On top of that, it also has a unique heavy attack that causes you to spin like a razor-sharp top mid-air and cut your enemy loads of times on repeat like a Beyblade. The unique skill on it is really fun too, flinging somewhat acrobatically forwards for some extremely powerful slices, and using this weapon just makes you feel like a badass. On top of that, it is incredibly buffable, so you can make a very strong and viable build around it. It applies bleed status both by default and with the weapon skill itself. It hits rapidly, which lets you do successive hit shenanigans, and the heavy attack when charged is an absolute meat grinder, so you can even use the charged heavy boosting methods as well. It's cool looking, it's fun to use, and it is very powerful. There isn't a massive amount more that you can ask for from a weapon. The only reason it isn't higher on this list for me is because of my own personal preferences, as I have a definite soft spot for things that are, well, silly, to put it simply. Speaking of, number 6, Ringed Finger. This hammer is quite literally a giant severed finger for which the shaft is the bone of the finger itself. You swing it around at your enemies and it looks hilarious and ridiculous, and it does pretty decent damage as silly as it is. And that's not even including its ridiculous unique weapon skill, Claw Flick. This makes the finger itself expand as you hold the weapon in front of you, and then it flicks out forwards. The flick has a massive amount of stagger damage and can knock smaller enemies straight down to the floor. It has a massive amount of poise damage too, so if you hit it a couple of times in a row, you get a free crit, and the actual damage itself is not bad at all. Back in the day, this weapon wasn't all that strong and had limited ways to buff it that hindered it, but thanks to patch 1.07, it actually got way better. The damage went up a notable amount, and it gave a good bit of poise damage to the actual expanding part of the weapon skill, making it way easier to hit the flick proper on pretty much any enemy in the game. Silly weapon made strong, my favorite kind of weapon. Number 5. Ghiza's Wheel, and this is the highest up a weapon can get on my list without being particularly strong. Obviously, there is a ton of satisfaction gained when you can use a weapon to annihilate a difficult boss, and, well, this weapon is honestly just not quite powerful enough to do that properly. I love what it is. It's a giant saw blade you swing around, the heavy attacks spin for extra damage, the weapon skill is just constant spinning while you slowly push it forward into enemies as it deals loads of instances of tiny damage, but From Software seems to have been a bit scared of what this weapon could be as they were making it, as it just made it incompatible with a bunch of buffs that theoretically you would imagine would definitely affect the weapon. The weapon skill isn't buffed by the Shard of Alexander talisman, even though that is exactly what that talisman is built to do. And weirdly, the weapon skill also doesn't trigger successive hit buffs, even though that is undeniably many quick consecutive hits with the weapon itself. There is no way to argue that it isn't. As well, the actual weapon skill does less bleed than the weapon hits themselves, so it isn't even good in that way. I find this weapon incredibly cool, and I love how it works from top to bottom, and hey, if it was buffable by the things that I think should buff it, then it might have even moved to the number 1 or 2 slot on this list because I love it that much. But this is the highest that I can justify putting a pizza cutter in its current sort of sad state of power, regardless of how much I love the concept. Number 4, Cranial Vessel Candle Stand. Look, I mentioned earlier I have a soft spot for silly weapons. Well, that extends even further to the concept of a head on a stick as a weapon. I just find the idea hilarious, especially when it's effective, and what we have here is a head on a stick that shoots out loads of fire in all directions around it. It is inherently silly, it is funny, I love it conceptually, but it is also insanely strong thanks to some changes it's gotten through for the patches, most notably in patch 1.07 where they increased the attack power significantly enough that this thing became an absolute boss-destroying machine to anything that isn't straight up resistant to fire. It genuinely kills second phase Godfrey in 2 inputs. All you have to do is stand there spamming the skill button and it just keeps shooting out ungodly amounts of flames for loads of damage. The weapon is silly, the skill is silly, and it's also just stupidly strong. An absolutely perfect combination in my books. Number 3. Grafted Dragon. This weapon straight up replaces your hand with a dragon. Again, this is one of those weapons that I absolutely adored when I first saw it. It's such a cool concept. Maybe it's silly, maybe it's not. That's sort of up to you to decide, but I enjoy it and I like silly things, so I don't know what that says about it. Of course, the most disappointing part of this weapon is that it's a fist weapon that can't be two-handed to make a second one pop out, but you can rectify that either in New Game Plus or by having a nice friend drop it for you so you have 2, as you can still power stance them that way. It's just fun to have silly little dragons for hands, and they also do bonus damage to dragon enemies because why not? The unique skill on this is called Bear Witness. It shoots out a bunch of little fireballs upwards in an arc so they rain down on everything in front of you, and for a while there was even a cool glitch where they would take the effect of your right hand weapon and apply it to the Ash of War. So you could apply Blood Flame with the weapon skill or Frost buildup or whatever effect you wanted. It just made it tons of fun to use, and I adore the weapon as a concept, so there's no way it wasn't getting a nice high spot on this list because of that part where it was effective. Number 2, Blasphemous Blade. Okay, this one isn't really silly. It's a great sword covered in, well, bits of Rykard, honestly. I know I've made my preference for silliness clear, but silliness doesn't have to be conceptual to the weapon itself. Sometimes it's in the actual gameplay, because actually using this weapon feels ridiculous. The unique skill just shoots out a line of fire in front of you that goes ridiculously long, does an insane amount of damage, and is buffable by a ton of sources. On top of that, it also heals you every time that the weapon skill does damage. You get healed every time an enemy dies when you have the sword out, and I don't even know what else to say. It is an absolute wrecking ball and a total oddity. For the most part, even the strongest weapons in this game feel somewhat balanced, but this one just feels like they looked at it and said, fuck it, this is the easy mode weapon. This one will look incredibly cool and make you feel badass, and we will balance it so that it demolishes just about every single enemy in the game with minimal effort. My first Malenia kill was with this weapon, and I almost felt dirty with how easy it was after hearing my friends talk about Malenia, but it is undeniable that this weapon is an insane amount of fun to actually walk around with. Number 1.
Woo! Hooray! Bubble Party!
Envoy's Longhorn. This section also includes the other two bubble trumpet weapons, of course, but this specific one of them is my favorite. It's a big old golden trumpet that you swing around as a warhammer, and the unique skill is just an absolute shower of bubbles coming out the front, like little landmines that pop and explode for damage if an enemy walks into them. It is buffable as hell, and that means it does a ton of damage to enemies that aren't particularly resistant to holy, but mainly this one is just so silly. It is hilarious. It is a musical instrument that you use as a weapon, and its main method of dealing damage is making goddamn bubbles. I mean, how could you possibly word that in a way that doesn't sound ridiculous? There is just no physical way. It's not possible. And yet it is also a super potent weapon if you build around it too. So here we have quite possibly the most ridiculous, silliest weapon in the game, and it isn't just a joke. It isn't just put there to make you laugh, because it is genuinely quite effective as well. I love this weapon from the bottom of my heart, and of course it's also buffed by wearing the helmet of the Bubble Boys, so if you want to use it at its maximum power, you have to make your character look silly as well, and I love that. I love all of it. This is undeniably my favorite weapon in the game. That just about does it, everyone. My personal list of the top 10 weapons in Elden Ring. I love everything on this list, and for the most part, they are all usable as a main weapon for a playthrough if you know what to build around them. What do you think? Do you like the same kinds of weapons as me, or are your favorites completely different? Let us know down in the comments down below. Like if you like the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.